The topic is titled Inevitable Time. This is a phrase that Srila Prabhupada has used in the story of Grandfather Bhishma's consoling Maharaj Yudhisthira. First, a little background, just the setting, the scene. Grandfather Bhishma, we call him Grandfather Bhishma because in relation to the 5 Pandava brothers, he was their grandfather. Bhishma Dev was the son of Santanu and Ganga. And Santanu had another wife besides Ganga, and her name was Satyavati. And Satyavati had 2 sons, and both of those sons died before they produced a son. Both of those sons died before they produced a son. So Satyavati was in big anxiety amongst the wives. Rather than going through the whole Mahabharata history, Grandfather Bhishma raised these 5 brothers as his grandchildren. The 5 brothers were the sons of Pandu, and the grandfather raised the 5 sons when Pandu died. So they had this very close affection for him, naturally, and he for them. And without going into all the intricate details of how it came to be that Grandfather Bhishma was on one side of the armies and the Pandavas were on the other side with Krishna. That has its own explanation, but that was the situation. And Grandfather Bhishma actually wanted the Pandavas to win. And in the course of the battle, Grandfather Bhishma disclosed to the Pandavas how he could be destroyed. He who could not be destroyed by even Lord Parshuram could be destroyed by other methods. He described the methods, and he was filled with arrows lying on the battlefield in a situation where he was about to die. But he had received a benediction from his father, Santanu, that he didn't have to leave his body unless he chose to leave his body. So he chose to leave his body in the presence of Krishna. And so Krishna, together with the 5 brothers, headed by Yudhisthira, they went to see Grandfather Bhishma, and they were horrified to see him in that condition. Already, Yudhisthira was filled with grief over the outcome of the battle, namely, so many men were killed during the course of the battle. He was holding himself accountable for the death of so many men, and for what reason in his mind, so that I can become the king? How horrible, what a wretched person I am. He was feeling like that because the virtuous person doesn't like to see others in difficulty. Krishna tried to pacify Grandfather Bhishma. It didn't work. By Krishna's arrangement, it didn't work because Krishna wanted to honor his very elevated devotee, Grandfather Bhishma. Those of you that are familiar with the term Mahajan, Mahajanayena Katasa Panta. Prabhupada spoke that phrase many, many times. The great souls, Mahajana, they're 12 in number. They're described in the Bhagavatam, and Grandfather Bhishma is one. So Grandfather Bhishma is going to give instructions to Maharaj Yudhisthira that pacify the grief of Maharaj Yudhisthira and send him on a course of progressive devotional service instead. So the scene opens. We'll be discussing several verses, starting with text 11. Those of you that have your Bhagavatam, you're alerted that we'll be speaking Canto 1, Chapter 9, text 11 through 17. So the scene opens with the Pandavas seeing Grandfather Bhishma in this condition, horrible condition, and they're feeling even more sorrowful than they were before. And Grandfather Bhishma detects their sorrow, and he wants to pacify their hearts. So I'm going to begin reading. Canto 1, Chapter 9, text 11. Grandfather Bhishma. The sons of Maharaj Pandu were sitting silently nearby, overtaken with affection for their dying grandfather. Seeing this, Bhishma Dev congratulated them with feeling. There were tears of ecstasy in his eyes, for he was overwhelmed by love and affection. Grandfathers love their grandchildren, and grandchildren love their grandfathers, and it's a very natural affection. And just seeing them, he was filled with love and affection, so much so that his great hero, warrior, couldn't control his crying, and profuse tears were coming. And specifically, the commentary says, purport says, that he was so happy that they had become victorious, and instead of Duryodhana becoming the emperor of the world, it was Yudhisthira. This filled him with affection, love, and joy. Now consider his bodily discomfort, pain. We get a little pinprick or stub our toe or some little toothache or something. Consciousness gets absorbed in that little pain. His body is riddled with arrows, and he's transcended the pain, and he's absorbed instead in love and affection with tears of joy. That's his consciousness, Grandfather Bhishma. He remembered the great tribulations suffered by his most pious grandsons. Certainly, he was the most satisfied man because of Yudhisthira's being enthroned in place of Duryodhana, and thus he began to congratulate them. Doesn't speak the words of congratulation, but we can understand there was some conversation. Yay, you become the emperor of the world. I'm so happy for you. And things like that. Now he's going to take away the grief from the heart of Yudhisthira. Listen carefully how he does it. Very skilled and very important, relevant for us also. Bhishma Dev said, text 12, "Oh, what terrible sufferings and what terrible injustices you good souls suffer for being the sons of religion personified. Dharmaraj, is the religion personified. And Yudhishthir is the son of Dharmaraj or Yamaraj. You did not deserve to remain alive under those tribulations, yet you're protected by the Brahmanas' God and religion. I spoke on this same verse yesterday for the local temple, and emphasis seemed to go to these 3 points. I want to make emphasis on inevitable time. But the 3 points are important. We have difficulties that come to us. I don't know anybody that doesn't have difficulties that come to them. We're all sharing that experience. When difficulties come, the advice of Grandfather Bhishma to you and me, along with Yudhishthira, is turn your attention instead of to the difficulty and the feelings connected with the difficulty, the misfortune that comes and the feelings connected with that misfortune. Don't simply become absorbed in that feature of life. Rather, look within when misfortune comes and consider 3 things. Have I conducted my activities in a theistic way, according to the codes of Dharma, or have I deviated from Dharma and have engaged in adharma? In the case of Yudhishthira, no question, no adharma, no sin. And he says it later. He says it explicitly later. Don't think that these things are happening because of some past sin and now you have to suffer. That's not the case. He's just confirming. This is the great Mahajan, Grandfather Bhishma. So what we can do is, have I been living my life according to Dharma? And then next, when we carry out those proper activities, have we been guided by qualified Brahmanas and Vaishnavas? And as we're carrying out those duties, guided by qualified Brahmanas and Vaishnavas, have we been meditating upon the personality of Godhead as the one who these activities are meant to please? Have we been thinking like that? This is the bhakti principle. The bhakti principle has as a subset of it, it's included that you live by theistic conduct and you're guided by qualified Vaishnavas. To the degree that we're doing those 2 things and aligning those 2 things with trying to please Krishna by our activities, then when misfortune comes, we have nothing to lament. That's stated explicitly in the purport. Because Yudhishthira is lamenting. He is grieving. And now after speaking about Yudhishthira and his brothers, the Pandavas, next Grandfather Bhishma is going to speak about Kunti. Let's read text 13. As far as my daughter-in-law, Kunti, because his Kunti's married to Pandu, and Pandu, the father of the Pandavas and the husband of Kunti, Pandu was one of the brothers, stepbrothers of Bhishma. So therefore, my daughter-in-law Kunti, upon the great General Pandu's death, she became a widow with many children. And therefore she suffered greatly. And when you were grown up, she suffered a great deal also because of your actions. The conclusion in the purport is, this means that she was destined to suffer by providence. And this one has to tolerate without being disturbed. This is the acceptance principle and the inevitable time principle. Here, the word is being used providence. Providence means divine arrangement. And divine arrangement happens through the agency of time. I'll say it again. Divine arrangement happens through the agency of time. Time keeps moving. Not just the hands of the clock move, tick, 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 but time energy, Kala Shakti, moves matter. And we'll hear some more about how time moves matter. But that's Bhishma Dev's explanation. Kunti did not deserve sinful reaction because there was no sin in her life. She was a perfected, pure devotee. We're not in that position, but she is. And we'll hear some more about how time and how providence acts in the lives of devotees. But the suffering of Kunti and the suffering of the Pandavas was not due to karma, but due to another force, another factor. The force of inevitable time. Let's continue. Text 14. In my opinion, this is all due to inevitable time, under whose control everyone in every planet is carried, just as clouds are carried by the wind. I'm going to read this, a very important purport to understand Bhishma Dev's message. There is control by time. There is control by time all over the space within the universe, as there is control by time all over the planets, as the big, gigantic planets, including the sun, are being controlled by the force of air, as the clouds are carried by the force of air. Similarly, the inevitable kala, or time, controls even the actions of the air and other elements. I'm going to pause. We'll go back to the purport. Prabhupada doesn't give details, but I'll give a little bit of detail. Many of you are familiar with the story of Dhruva Maharaj, because we discussed it during our last national holiday, the whole story of Dhruva. After Dhruva achieved spiritual perfection, he ruled his father's kingdom for a long time, and then Dhruva went to Dhruvaloka, high in the heavenly region. Dhruvaloka is located within the universe in the uppermost region of the heavenly planets. We know from Vedic teaching, there's the earthly realm, Bhuloka. Above Bhuloka is Bhuvar Loka, and above Bhuvar Loka is Swargaloka, or heaven. And Dhruvaloka is to the topmost region of Swargaloka, or heaven. And all the planets below move out of circumambulating respect to Dhruvaloka, because Dhruvaloka is the abode of Lord Vishnu, Svetadvip, the same place where Shiradakshay Vishnu resides. The fifth canto Bhagavatam teaches us that the movement of the planets, just like the TOVP, the Temple of Vedic Planetarium in Mayapur, is going to exhibit this in a moving exhibit where the planets, Bhuvarloka, Bhuloka, Bhuvarloka, and Swargaloka move like a chandelier moves, pivoting around Dhruvaloka. So as they move in a clockwise direction, the Bhagavatam teaches us one of the ways, the mechanics of how that is arranged, is there are ropes of air that connect all the planets, including the sun and our planet and every other planet in the heavenly region, is connected to Dhruvaloka through a rope of air. The term is pravaha vayu. Vayu means air, and pravaha is a rope of air. And so those ropes, we can't see a rope of air, but there's a rope of air that connects the planets with Dhruvaloka. And there's this universal wind that blows those ropes of air so the planets move by the force of air. The sun moves by the force of air. The sun moves on Kala Chakra, the wheel of time. But that wheel of time is also connected to a rope that moves by the force of the wind. That's Kala Chakra. That's inevitable time. And inevitable time, as air, as air moves the planets, time moves the air. Things move in our lives, and things moves on in the planetary scale, whether it's small or big. Air moves stuff, and time moves the air and all other elements. That's the Vedic teaching. We don't see ropes of air. We don't see time moving those ropes of air. We don't see lots of things. But that's what's happening. And Bhishma Dev is aware. Prabhupada is explaining it in the purport, and I'm going to continue now with the purport. Time moves the planets by time moving air. Everything, therefore, is controlled by the supreme Kala, a forceful representative of the Lord within the material world. Thus, Yudhisthira should not be sorry for the inconceivable action of time. This is the theme of this morning's class. Yudhisthira should not be sorry for the inconceivable action of time. This is the acceptance. Time moves things. Everyone has to bear the actions and reactions of time, as long as one is within the conditions of the material world. Yudhisthira should not think that he had committed sins in his previous birth and is suffering the consequence. Even the most pious has to suffer the condition of material nature. But a person, a man, is faithful, who is faithful in the Lord, because he is guided by the bona fide Brahmanas and Vaishnavas following religious principles. That's just these three elements. There's the acceptance of inevitable time. Just repeating. Inevitable time moves everything. And when things move this way, that way, just like the clouds in the sky. When the wind moves the clouds in the sky, we don't go, oh, the cloud is moving that way instead of this way. We have no control over it. The wind changes direction and the clouds blow another direction. And what determines which way the wind is blowing? There's many, many factors that weather report people will tell you, but ultimately it's dependent upon inevitable, invincible time. It's one of Krishna's powerful potencies in this world that moves everything. This is a higher understanding, a higher level of consciousness to understand how things are moving the way that they're moving. The time energy is moving everything. So what do? We accept time moves things, and we look within, same point as previously. After having accepted time, providential arrangement, how are we conducting our lives? These 3 points. Am I striving to please Krishna? Am I being guided by qualified Vaishnavas in that effort to please Krishna? Is my conduct consistent with theistic rule? That's where our attention goes when some misfortune comes or inevitable time brings misfortune. These 3 guiding principles should be the aim of life. One should not be disturbed by the tricks of eternal time. Even the great controller of the universe, Brahmaji, is also under the control of that time. Conclusion, therefore, one should not grudge being thus controlled by time, despite being a true follower of religious principles. Don't hold a grudge against circumstances that come your way that look like, oh no, misfortune. It happens. Don't get lost in the misfortune. Just stay fixed in your dedicated service to the personality of Godhead, and clarity will come. Krishna will help you with intelligence and strength and wisdom and right conduct. Stay there. That's the message that Bhishma Dev is giving to Yudhisthira, and that's the message we should take from this passage. Just a few more verses. He goes on, Bhishma. Oh, how wonderful is the influence of inevitable time. It is irreversible. Otherwise, how can there be reverses in the presence of King Yudhisthira, the son of the demigod controlling religion? Bhima, the great fighter with a club, the great bowman Arjuna with his mighty weapon Gandiva, and above all, the Lord, the direct well-wisher of the Pandavas. So we're not in such elevated positions as the persons just mentioned. What to speak of Krishna's not visibly present with us throughout our lives. He's visibly present to the degree that we have, he's present to the degree that we have devotion for him. So we're not Pandavas, we're new people, new bhaktas, but we have Krishna's presence also. So how can we explain when difficulties come? Maybe we can explain that it's a reversal due to our past misdeeds. But if that's the case, there's a very nice verse. Many of you know Brahma Samhita. Yes, Twindra Gopam Atavendra Maho Swakarma. It's very instructive for devotees that the verse says, from the topmost king of heaven, Indra, down to the little microscopic entity called an Indra Gopa germ, they're all receiving their karma by the arrangements of Govinda. But then what about the devotees? The devotees may experience not karma, but the arrangement of Govinda to uproot from the heart, the very cause of our material existence. What's that? The strong desire for fruitive activity and the tendency for misdeeds. They're uprooted. It's a weed. It's a very insidious danger in the heart that keeps us bound birth after birth. That bhakti process uproots the weeds, these tendencies. For the Pandavas, there's no such tendency. For us, there is such tendency. The misfortune of the Pandavas is entirely inevitable time. Our misfortune, because we're engaged in bhakti, reactions of karma are annihilated, but tendencies still remain. The good news is Krishna will help us. And one of the ways he helps us is tribulation. It's kindness, tribulation for the devotee, because Krishna is uprooting the very tendency for indulging ourselves and being enjoyers of matter and doing fruitive activities in order to get more matter to enjoy. Krishna's taking that tendency from the heart. We still do activities. We still carry out our duties, all varieties of duties, everything under the sun we do for Krishna, but not with the intention, the malicious intention of enjoying Krishna's property without Krishna. That's difficulty is removed. I'm going to read, again, it speaks about inevitable time. Despite the power of pious acts, the power of personalities, the power of expert management, and the power of weapons, under the direct supervision of Lord Krishna, the Pandavas suffered so many practical reverses which can only be explained as due to the influence of Kala, inevitable time. Kala is identical with the Lord himself, and therefore the influence of Kala indicates the inexplicable wish of the Lord himself. Again, the conclusion, there is nothing to be lamented when a matter is beyond the control of any human being. And what's in the control of any human being? Ultimately, Krishna is the controller, and we're dependent upon Krishna. You can't change the direction of the clouds moving in the sky. The wind is going to determine that, and the time energy is going to determine the direction of the wind, along with other material factors. But the higher factor is inevitable time. And not just as the clouds move by the force of the wind, so our lives move by the force of the wind of time that moves things this way, that way. There's the acceptance of that reality and rededication of ourselves, which is how this section concludes. O King, no one can know the plan of Lord Krishna, even though great philosophers inquire exhaustively, they are bewildered. So sometimes we want to, when some misfortune comes, why is this happening? Or is there some lesson from Krishna that I'm supposed to learn from this misfortune? And so on. Well, we can inquire like that, and maybe we'll get something of an idea. But Bhishma Dev is advising, it's not easy to understand the plan of the Lord. He may reveal it, but sometimes his revealing of his plan doesn't come till much later. When they're in the midst of a tribulation, we don't realize, why is this happening? The plan of the Lord. But we can know things are happening by some sanction of the Lord. Otherwise, as we hear, not even a blade of grass moves without the sanction of the Lord. And I'm concluding verse, text 17. Oh, best among the descendants of Bharata, Maharaj Yudhisthira, I maintain therefore that all this is within the plan of the Lord, accepting the inconceivable plan of the Lord. What are you supposed to do? Just like when it's suffering is coming, just shrug your shoulders and suffer. No, you accept that the misfortune is coming. It feels like suffering, but it's purification. It's uprooting tendencies to be material enjoyers of matter. And therefore, what should I do? One should dedicate oneself to one's duty, one's service to Krishna. Acceptance of the inconceivable plan of the Lord, you must follow it. You are now the appointed administrative head, and my Lord is his grandson, calling him my Lord because he's now the emperor. My Lord, take care of those subjects who are now rendered helpless. The short conclusion in the purport, the popular saying is that a housewife teaches the daughter-in-law by teaching the daughter. Similarly, the Lord teaches the world by teaching the devotee. Not too many devotees in the world, but our lives can be a way of teaching others about how to be dependent upon and intent upon pleasing the personality of Godhead. So we have the opportunity to model that nice example. And so the conclusion here, inevitable time moves circumstances. Nothing stays the same. It's just the nature of this world. One thing is permanent, and that is that everything is changing. And the changing force we're hearing from Bhishma Dev, it's inevitable time. Accept that reality. And in so doing, you accept Krishna's control in your life. And as you're accepting Krishna's control in your life, good fortune, ill fortune, don't try to become the enjoyer of the good fortune. Don't sob and grieve in the misfortune elements of life. Carry forward with your service of pleasing the personality of Godhead under the guidance of the Vaishnavas, striving to become one who abides by Dharma. That's our teaching of Bhagavad Gita also. Sarva dharmam parityaja mam ekam sharanam braja. Take the principle of surrendering unto Krishna alone as the way of life. Be guided in that by the Brahmanas and Vaishnavas. And stay always within the realm of theistic conduct while you're accepting the plan of the Lord. We don't know what's next, but he does. And he's inviting us to come to him. And that's the principal acceptance that allows the acceptance of the circumstances that are always changing. So I don't know how it's going to work. Could you get my reading glasses? They're probably up on the desk or that little night table, so I can read the chat questions. So I'm seeing on my screen a place for chat questions. You can hear me speak, but I can't hear you speak. So you're going to have to send questions by chat. Thank you. I don't see any chat questions. I don't even know if we're connected. Are we connected? Oh, there goes one. Okay. Rajendra. Wow. Well, we're waiting here because Rajendra sent a question in Chinese and Surabhi's translating it to English. Where did Bhishma Dev's knowledge come from? Well, where does everything come from? It comes from Krishna. But it's described when Bhishma Dev was born, he wasn't named Bhishma, he was Deva Vrata. And Ganga took him away. Ganga placed him in the care of, I forget which sage. Maybe somebody in the room can remember which sage. And for a number of years, he was trained. The knowledge of Bhishma Dev was, by Ganga's arrangement, trained by one great sage. And after some time, Ganga then again brought Bhishma back. And he's already, that's where his knowledge came from. And here's another long question in Chinese, which I assume Surabhi is going to translate. There she goes, translating. I would really appreciate it if, when we're all done, Surabhi and Sati can stay online and we can try to work out some arrangements so in the future we can do Zoom instead of this one. You're going to need the microphone. Here's her answer. When one does not have such deep realization, how can one follow such principles? We should focus on the Chinese devotees, but we can do that at the end. So I'll repeat the question. When one does not have such deep realization, how can one follow such principles? Well, two things: practice and make the heart pure. Because when the heart becomes pure, then you can get some realizations. Just yesterday, somebody sent to me a really nice text that came from Vishaka's book about her life with Prabhupada. And I'll forward it to Surabhi so she can forward it to all of you. And it's right on the topic of the question. In short, she learned from Prabhupada that first comes faith. And when there's faith, then comes knowledge. And when there's knowledge, then it strengthens and enriches devotion. But faith is not separate from devotion. Faith in Krishna is a beginning stage of devotion. By the process of hearing, just like we're doing right now, by the process of hearing, one can make a connection with Krishna. And then by faith and submission through the hearing process, knowledge awakens. We don't know who we are. We don't know who is Krishna. We don't know how to connect with him. We don't know lots of things. But faith is the starting point. And we're not so important. We're very tiny. And we're moved by the material energy, as Vaidehi is speaking here. But knowledge awakens, and that gives direction to our life. So we practice. And we want to make ourselves qualified. So that's the basic principles of sadhana bhakti: hearing and chanting Shravanam, Kirtanam, chanting the holy name and hearing the messages of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam in particular, and the other devotional texts. That makes the heart clean. And then we can be better followers because we have a clean heart and we have Krishna's mercy operating within our heart. That's what you do. You practice. To your capacity, you practice. And to the degree that you don't have that purity yet, you'll be tossed this way and that way by the material energy. It's not a pleasant ride. So we don't like unpleasant rides. We like it nice. So take shelter of Krishna. Surabhi, we're ready for the next question.
It was Sage Brihaspati Maharaj.
What?
Sage Brihaspati. Bhishma.
Okay, Brihaspati. Someone just did some research, and the person, Rajendra, the person who instructed Bhishma before he was Bhishma, Deva Rata, was Brihaspati. Now, Ganga had come from the spiritual realm. Brihaspati is the chief priest of the demigods. So at least this reference says it was Brihaspati that trained him. That's where he got his knowledge. Yes? Okay, translating is happening. While we're waiting for the translation, in addition to figuring out how to connect with Zoom, it would be nice to figure out how I can hear their questions rather than they write it in Chinese and then Surabhi translates in Chinese. It takes more time than speaking it. The translation just disappeared. She was texting something and then it disappeared.
Skype works for them?
What's that?
Skype works for trainers?
Yes.
You can try the Skype group call.
Maharaj, I can translate the Chinese using Google Translate on your system.
We don't need more technology right now. I mean, she's a very capable translator. She was translating as I spoke, simultaneous. She wasn't like pause and then she translates. Okay. The reason that past sinful things happen is due to Krishna's arrangement. We should fully accept those and not lament. Is this understanding correct? Yes. I'll read it again. The reason that, and Rajendra has another question. The reason that past sinful things happened is due to Krishna's arrangement. We should fully accept these and not lament for Krishna's arrangements. Yes. That's the materialist. The materialist gets Krishna's mercy in the form of good karma, bad karma. For the devotees, we should understand that anything that happens to us as devotees is not a full-on karma blast, good fortune, ill fortune, either way. It's a token reciprocation from Krishna as a reminder of our past misdeeds. So it's quite different. But yes, we should accept whatever arrangement comes. Okay. Rajendra sent a detailed question. And Surabhi, I guess you can translate that. Not sure what to do here because we have, in addition to the Chinese devotees, there are some people listening here in America. So maybe you can read into the microphone, read one of those questions while she's translating Rajendra's question.
Hima Suryavanshi Mataji asks, is it okay if we pray to Krishna and desire to not have difficulties in life?
Well, you can go ahead and desire to not have difficulties in life. And you can pray to Krishna for that, but you're definitely going to have difficulties. It's not just you, it's even the Pandavas. Sinless people have difficulties. So it's not the best thing to pray to Krishna for something that isn't going to happen. Next. She's still typing.
Should I rephrase it so that's like a question? Because I think it's supposed to be a question, but like.
Go right ahead, do what you got to do.
Okay. Shri Radhika Devidasi Mataji asks, I thought I've heard from you that Bhishma was trained by Parashuram.
Bhishma received military training from Parshuram, yes. But that wasn't the question. The question was, where did the knowledge, because Grandfather Bhishma was a Mahajan, and where did the knowledge of being a Mahajan come from? Yes, Bhishma Dev was trained by Parshuram in military skill.
And then there's a question from Inner Tube who asks, should we chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra on beads while listening to Krishna Katha lecture?
No, do one or the other with full attention. That's it. We have some translation work going on here. Here we go. Bhishma Dev has transcendental knowledge, and he knew he stood on the wrong side and had to carry out the duty. Those were also inevitable time, or all these were played under Krishna's arrangement in order to guide us, conditioned souls. Well, I don't see there's a distinction between those two choices. Let's take the second one. Grandfather Bhishma is a pure devotee. So the choices he made were under Krishna's arrangement, including fighting on the wrong side. Prabhupada explains why that was. And there's other explanations. So let's just leave it simple rather than the involved explanation. Grandfather Bhishma did what he did because he's a pure devotee, and he did what he did under Krishna's indication as super soul. And the other is he was being carried by inevitable time, which is no different for him, no different than super soul. Same for the Pandavas. Let's just take, the circumstance of the gambling match. How did that happen? Krishna's arrangement. We can look to other lessons to be learned, but the lessons to be learned are part of Krishna's arrangement to learn lessons. So as with the Pandavas, the tribulations that Kunti was put through and so forth, everything was the divine arrangement of inexorable time or inevitable time and super soul. There's no putting them in two buckets, one bucket. So I know that the time there in China is 9:00 in the evening. And I think we may want to call an end to this class. But if Surabhi and Sati can stay on, we can try to figure out a way to have a future call by Zoom instead of Skype. So you two can please remain on, and our technology folks will interact with you, and I hope all is well. Hare Krishna. So I'm going to take my computer. I'd like to take my computer. Do I need to leave it here so you can?
Zoom is on that one.
But that connect with her, does it also connect with Sati? Because we want Sati to be able to connect to Zoom. So I'll leave my computer and you can have fun.